It's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Hi, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen, thank you. We're going to leave the election results up as they come in during this hour. They'll be on the screen as we cover the Supreme Court decisions.
Looking forward to watching.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. It was the most corrupt inauguration day in history, with the immediate pardon of 1,600 people who committed crimes for the newly sworn-in President of the United States, who, upon taking the oath of office, had the constitutionally granted power to pardon anyone. But he thought he had more power than that. And that made it the stupidest inauguration day in history.
This next order relates to the definition of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment of the United States.
Yeah, that's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
What about that one in the courts? That one is likely to be passed.
Could be. We think we have good grounds, but you could be right. I mean, you'll find out. It's ridiculous. We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know.
As you know, the stupidest person ever to have a speaking role in the Oval Office actually believed he could use one of his Sharpies to cross out the words of the United States Constitution. Donald Trump's brand of stupidity comes delivered gift-wrapped in pride. He is that student who is so very proud to show his homework when he is completely wrong. He said that day something he said many, many times before and many times since, quote, "We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know," end quote. No, we don't know, Donald. There are dozens of other countries in the world that grant birthright citizenship. Donald Trump's voters would, of course, both share in and pardon his stupidity on this point, on the assumption that the other countries that grant birthright citizenship are those obscure little places with names Donald Trump can't pronounce or spell. How far would Donald Trump have to look to find a country that grants birthright citizenship? Well, there's Canada. Donald Trump grew up in a state bordering Canada, although I suspect he doesn't realize that. Another country we know Donald Trump has heard of that has birthright citizenship is Mexico. Everything Donald Trump has ever said about birthright citizenship is a lie meant for people and believed by people who read even less than he does and then vote for him. Donald Trump has been promising to get rid of birthright citizenship since he first became a presidential candidate. Here he is in 2015.
Birthright citizenship, the anchor baby, birthright citizenship, it's over. Not going to happen. Hundreds of thousands of people a year, coming from all over the world, by the way. It's over. Not going to happen. Now, I turned out to be right, the 14th Amendment. You know, I had these guys on television, oh, you can't change the 14th Amendment. It'll take so long. On that, I agree. But you know what? An act of Congress. The 14th Amendment, I was right on it. You can do something with it, and you can do something fast. You can do something fast.
You can do something fast. What happened? Why didn't he do something fast? He said, you can do something fast. That's what he said. Then Donald Trump got 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, but won the Electoral College, and he did nothing. After saying he could do something fast to end birthright citizenship. But when he became president the first time, he did absolutely nothing about it, and now we know why. Stephen Miller was outsmarted by Trump White House lawyers who could read. That's what happened in the first Trump term. In their new best-selling book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump, New York Times reporters Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan describe what Donald Trump's anti-immigration fanatic Stephen Miller was planning if Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election. Quote, Miller was not a lawyer himself, but he built close alliances with those who were. He had learned from term one that finding the right lawyers was the key to everything. He talked in private about hiring and promoting attorneys with the stiffest spines, no more of what he saw as weak-kneed types who would report back quickly that the president's orders were illegal or who were unwilling to stretch the law to achieve Trump's goals. Miller soon had a second-term remit that sprawled across the government with the most critical new component, his role of overseeing the dozens of presidential decrees the White House would issue in a blizzard of activity in the first week. These included an order to end birthright citizenship that had been dismissed by Trump's first-term attorneys as blatantly unconstitutional. This time, the executive orders would be approved by a new cadre of lawyers, some of whom Miller had personally recruited. Today, the Supreme Court gave those lawyers an F. Donald Trump became the first president in history to attend a Supreme Court hearing to watch when one of his lawyers was disgracing himself to history by trying to argue against the plain language of the United States Constitution on birthright citizenship. That lawyer, Donald Trump's Solicitor General, was cornered into replies to the justices like, quote, "I'm not sure, I have to think that through," and, quote, "It's a great question, and I'm thinking about it for the first time." And Donald Trump had to listen to Cecilia Wang, the daughter of immigrants who obtained her citizenship by being born in this country, argue in favor of birthright citizenship and in opposition to everything Donald Trump has ever said about it.
In fact, the framers did consider the concept and the actual problems of immigration that were coming up at that time. In addition to this, notable exchange between Senator Cowan and Senator Conness, where Cowan says, if we have this citizenship clause as part of the Constitution, we are going to encourage these gypsies, what he called gypsies, Roma, in Pennsylvania, whom he characterized as invaders, trespassers, and lawbreakers, will encourage them to come into our country because their children will be citizens. He says, Senator Conness, in your state of California, you will be facing a mass flood of Chinese immigration if we adopt the citizenship rule. And Senator Conness, himself an Irish immigrant, says, yes, and I am voting for that because I believe in citizenship by virtue of birth without regard to parentage.
The Citizenship Clause of the Constitution says, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. You cannot ask for more clarity in constitutional prose. As usual, the three Supreme Court justices appointed by Democratic presidents easily passed the basic intelligence test of demonstrating an understanding of what those words clearly mean. They were joined in that understanding by two justices appointed by Republican presidents, Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts. It was the Chief's prerogative to write the majority opinion, which on page 1 says simply, quote, children born in the United States to parents unlawfully or temporarily present are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause. The majority opinion reached back deep into the history of English common law for the origins of birthright citizenship in American colonial law. Chief Justice Roberts wrote, quote, this common law of citizenship, known as jus soli, or right of the soil, crossed the Atlantic and prevailed in each and all of the states after American independence. As the Civil War approached, more and more Southern states sought to deny citizenship to Black Americans and openly rejected the common law to reach that result. In the odious decision of Dred Scott versus Sanford, this court imposed the Southern states' beliefs onto the nation. Dred Scott was met with shock. The court had overruled the common law, but the people eventually would overrule the court. The Chief Justice pointed out that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 said, quote, that all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby citizens of the United States. To the Reconstruction Congress, the act was simply assumed to invoke the common law. What the Civil Rights Act began, the 14th Amendment would finish. Like the act, the 14th Amendment was intended to repudiate Dred Scott. This time, however, the goal was even grander, to put the great question of citizenship beyond the legislative power altogether, to settle the issue once and for all. The 14th Amendment achieved its aim. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson added her concurring opinion to the Chief Justice's majority ruling, saying, quote, I join the court's opinion in full. I write separately to respond to some of the themes in the principal dissent. The principal dissent was written by Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Jackson wrote, despite his longstanding endorsement of a colorblind constitution, Justice Thomas now surprisingly suggests that the Citizenship Clause was a race-conscious remedial measure relating only to freed slaves such as Dred Scott and those who shared with them certain characteristics. It is for this reason, he says, that children who were born in the United States but to parents not domiciled here are not entitled to claim birthright citizenship. But that narrow vision of the 14th Amendment bears little relationship to the history of its ratification. Even worse, Justice Thomas's telling elides the entire point of the second founding. The Reconstruction Amendments were an anti-caste, anti-subordination reset for the nation, not a mere spot treatment for the dark stain of slavery. And leading off our coverage tonight is Professor Laurence Tribe, who has taught constitutional law at Harvard Law School for 5 decades. Professor Tribe, I know you've been waiting for this decision, as we all have, since the court agreed to take the case in the first place. Can you explain to us why all 9 justices could not read that simple language of birthright citizenship the same way?
Well, they certainly could read it the same way if they were being honest lawyers without any agenda. Nobody took seriously this strange argument that the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what it says, that the language subject to the jurisdiction thereof means something other than being subject to the power of the United States, which applies to everybody born here, unless they happen to be born in a foreign embassy or in a foreign military encampment. They could all read it. But gradually, what sociologists and philosophers call the Overton window, the range of argument that is considered at least worth taking seriously, gradually that shifted. It shifted because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller wanted to find lawyers who would argue this completely ahistorical position, atextual, ahistorical, inconsistent with what Ketanji Brown Jackson rightly described as the second founding of the country. They wanted to find lawyers who would read it in this odd, different way. And sure enough, they did. I didn't expect this decision to be unanimous. Even before the argument, we knew that there were indications in some of the writings of Clarence Thomas in particular, but also Samuel Alito, that suggested they might come up with some way to agree with the revisionist lawyers. What we did not know, what I think very few people predicted, was that on the basic constitutional issue, this
Harvard Law Professor Laurence Tribe, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thank you for having me, Lawrence.
And coming up, to explore those historical elements of the decision that Professor Tribe was just referring to, we'll be joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning historian David Blight, who was quoted in today's Supreme Court opinion. That's next. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson highlighted the legislative history of birthright citizenship, beginning with Senator Lyman Trumbull's advocacy of the Civil Rights Act of 1886. She wrote, Senator Lyman Trumbull's first proposal homed in on the freedmen and provided merely that all persons of African descent born in the United States are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. If that language had prevailed, the view Justice Thomas asserts today might be well-founded. But Senator Trumbull changed his mind. The day after he submitted that first proposal, he requested to withdraw the original and offer another in lieu of it to the same purport, changing the phraseology. Consistent with the views espoused by activists, Trumbull's new proposal adopted a distinctly universalist register. All persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States without any distinction of color. This is the language Congress would eventually enact as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 would go on to become the basis for the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause. Senator Trumbull's progression from specific to universal was more than mere word choice. In the face of the virulent anti-immigrant and in particular the anti-Chinese and anti-Romani sentiment of that era, language targeting just freed former slaves would have been the path of least or less resistance. But Senator Trumbull, along with those colleagues who took up the same mantle during the ratification debates, expressly rejected that narrow framing. And joining us now is David Blight, Yale University professor of history and Black studies. He's the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. And Professor Blight, Justice Jackson quoted your book and your writing in her opinion today. We just heard Professor Tribe talk about the historical references made by the justices, and I know this is always an interesting exercise for you to read the amateur historian work done in Supreme Court opinions. What was your reading of this one today?
Justice Jackson was not an amateur today. Quite the opposite. In fact, I already emailed the executive director of the Organization of American Historians, and I said, is there any way we could put Jackson's opinion in the next issue of the Journal of American History? Because frankly, Lawrence, it reads like a historical essay. It is a historical essay. It's deeply researched. She not only quotes from me or quotes Frederick Douglass several times, but 6, 7 other historians, the best historians of Reconstruction. And, you know, it sets up her essential argument, which is that Section 1 of the 14th, and especially birthright citizenship, is rooted in universalist principles. And she even ends by not only, quoting Douglass, which, by the way, at least 3 of the 9 justices did in today's opinions. Thomas did too, of course. Thomas loves Frederick Douglass for his own peculiar ways, but even Justice Roberts quoted Douglass at the very beginning. But Justice Jackson ends by going to a section in my book. It was so moving to me, I must.
The U.S. Supreme Court has delivered a major ruling on birthright citizenship, rejecting President Donald Trump's effort to limit automatic citizenship for many children born in the United States. The court ruled that the 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to nearly everyone born on U.S. soil, regardless of their parents' immigration status, with only a few long-recognized exceptions, such as children of foreign diplomats. The majority opinion explained that this principle has deep roots in American history and was strengthened after the Civil War through the adoption of the 14th Amendment. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote separately, arguing that the amendment was designed as a universal guarantee of equality and citizenship, not a protection limited to any single group. Chief Justice John Roberts also emphasized that the amendment was intended to settle the issue of citizenship once and for all. The decision drew strong disagreement from 4 conservative justices, who argued that the Constitution should be interpreted differently and that Congress could still play a role in shaping future immigration policy. Legal scholars say the ruling is one of the most significant constitutional decisions in recent years because it reaffirms a long-standing interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Supporters of the decision argue it protects a fundamental constitutional right, while critics believe the court missed an opportunity to reconsider how birthright citizenship should apply today. The debate is far from over. Immigration is expected to remain one of the biggest political issues heading into future elections, and this ruling is likely to shape that conversation for years to come. What do you think? Should birthright citizenship remain exactly as it is today, or should Congress pursue changes through the constitutional process? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.